Okay, think about this for a second. Something most of us completely take for granted. Just getting a safe drink of water.
Right. It seems so basic.
But imagine this. In 2020, about 2 billion people, that's what, more than 1 in 4 globally, didn't have safely managed drinking water.
And it gets even starker when you look at low and middle income countries. That figure jumps to 42%, almost
Ah,
half.
it's huge. And look, we know you want to get the key info quickly without drowning in data.
Yeah.
So today we're diving into a study that tried to map out the different ways people in these countries actually get their drinking water.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that it tries to find patterns, but not just based on, which continent a country is on. It looks for deeper connections.
Exactly. We're digging into the paper, Drinking Water Accessibility Typologies in Low and Middle Income Countries. It's by Chung, Kumpel, and Oke, published in Environmental Research
And
Letters.
they took a really data-driven approach. They looked at 17 different indicators of how households access water.
17 different ways. Okay.
And instead of just saying, oh, these countries are all in sub-Saharan Africa, so they must be similar, they use some pretty sophisticated analysis.
Right, to see if countries maybe shared fundamental traits in water access, even if they were geographically miles apart.
Precisely.
So let's quickly touch on the how. They used what, 3 main analytical steps?
Yeah, basically 3 stages. First, something called exploratory factor analysis,
Okay.
then cluster analysis, and finally, a decision tree classification.
Okay. Sounds a bit technical, but let's break that down. It's like they had this big puzzle, right? 17 different pieces showing how people get water.
Uh-huh.
And these tools help them see, like, which pieces naturally fit together and what bigger pictures emerged.
That's a great way to put it. The factor analysis was about simplifying things, finding the underlying sort of themes
Yeah.
in those 17 data points.
Gotcha.
The cluster analysis then grouped the countries that showed similar patterns across these themes.
Group the countries.
Okay. And the decision tree helped figure out what broader factors, like economic or geographic ones, might explain why a country landed in a specific group.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's start with those 17 puzzle pieces, the indicators. What kinds of things were they actually measuring?
Well, they really tried to capture the reality on the ground. So it included the actual water source, like piped dwelling, meaning water piped right into your home,
Right, the ideal, really.
or maybe a protected spring, which is designed to keep contaminants out. They also looked at the effort involved, like measuring time to collect water 30 minutes.
Ah, so the convenience factor.
Exactly.
Uh,
And whether the source was on premises or off, things like using surface water rivers, lakes were also included, obviously less ideal. And also time to collect water 30 minutes.
Right, and it's important to remember these are averages for the whole country, right? Household averages.
Yes, exactly. National averages. So they give a broad picture.
Okay, 17 indicators is, well, it's a lot. How do they boil that down? That's where the factor analysis comes in.
Precisely. It helped condense those 17 down to 7 key underlying factors. You can think of these as the main narratives or stories about how people access water that emerged from the data.
7 key stories. Okay, let's hear them. What are they?
Okay, so the first one they called far well. This was strongly linked to using both protected and unprotected wells.
So far doesn't necessarily mean physically distant here.
Not necessarily. It's more about a reliance on wells as a primary source type in that factor.
Got it. Okay, what's next?
Number 2 is far spring. Same logic, but this one is primarily driven by the use of protected and unprotected springs.
Okay, so wells and springs as key source types. Makes sense. The next.
And we have nearby improved. The key driver here is short collection time, less than 30 minutes. It suggests access to a source that's convenient and considered an improvement over, say, just surface water.
Right, closer and better.
The number 4 is nearby surface. This one is quite interesting. It links that short collection time with using surface water and also unprotected springs.
So convenience might trump safety sometimes. People go for the closest source, even if it's not the best quality.
That seems to be the implication, yes. It highlights a potential trade-off.
That's a really important nuance. Okay, what else?
Factor 5 is pipe indoors. Pretty self-explanatory, strongly linked to having water piped right into the dwelling. Interestingly, it showed a negative link with boreholes in the analysis.
Meaning where you have more piped indoor water, you tend to see fewer households relying mainly on boreholes maybe, or vice versa.
That's the suggestion from the data patterns, yeah.
Okay. Piped indoors, clear sign of developed infrastructure. 2 more factors left.
Yep. Number 6 is piped outdoors. This captures water piped to a yard or a public tap stand, and it showed a negative relationship with piped dwelling.
Ah, so distinguishing between pipes in the house versus pipes just on the property or nearby.
Exactly. And the last one, number 7, is vended. This is all about purchased water. Think bottled water or water delivered by tanker cart.
Right. Market-based solutions. Okay, so those 7 factors really capture the essence, the source, the effort, the infrastructure level.
Absolutely. And this is where the cluster analysis comes in. They use these 7-factor scores for each country.
To see which countries look similar in their overall water access profile.
Exactly. And they found 3 distinct groups, or typologies as they call them.
3 types. And crucially, not just based on geography. This sounds much more insightful. What are the typologies?
Okay, the first group is centralized. This included 22 countries. They scored highest on those piped indoors and piped outdoors factors.
So these are the countries with generally the most developed, widespread piped water systems.
Pretty much, yeah. They typically have high rates of water being on premises, especially through pipes into dwellings or yards. Think countries like Colombia, the Kyrgyz Republic.
Yeah.
Namibia was flagged as the most representative example.
Okay, centralized dominant pipe systems. Got it. What's the second type?
The second is called hybrid. This group had 14 countries. And this one's really fascinating because they scored high on both piped indoors and vended factors.
Ah, so a mix. They have some centralized piped systems, but also a significant reliance on buying water.
Exactly. Bottled water, tanker trucks, that sort of thing plays a big role alongside the pipes. Interestingly, this group actually had the highest median on-premises access overall.
Higher than centralized?
Yes, but their actual pipe water usage levels were lower than the centralized group. So maybe more people have some kind of on-site source, but it's not always piped.
Interesting complexity there. Which countries are examples?
India, the Philippines, Turkey were mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And the Dominican Republic was seen as the most representative of this hybrid type.
This dual reliance, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Is this a transitional phase, maybe?
It's a great question. Perhaps a stage countries pass through as infrastructure develops. But demand, maybe for convenience or perceived quality, also drives market solutions.
Could be. Okay, and the third typology?
That's the decentralized group. And it's the largest, with 37 countries. These countries scored lowest on piped indoors.
So less reliance on extensive pipe networks. What defines them instead?
They were characterized more by factors like nearby improved, far well, and nearby surface. So off-premises sources like boreholes, wells, public taps are much more important. Piped and vended sources are less significant overall.
And I imagine collection time is a bigger issue here.
Definitely. The time spent collecting water was most significant in this group. You see many sub-Saharan African countries here, Congo DR, Kenya, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, but also some in Asia, like Afghanistan, Myanmar, Papua New Guinea. Gambia was the most representative example.
Okay, wow. So centralized is mostly pipes. Hybrid is
Right.
pipes plus buying water. And decentralized is more about various off-premises sources, often involving more collection effort. That paints a much clearer, more functional picture than just looking at a map.
Absolutely. Groups, countries facing similar types of challenges and using similar types of solutions. But the researchers wanted to go one step further.
Right. They wanted to see why countries fall into these groups, what predicts the typology.
Exactly. So they used that decision tree model. They looked at 13 different variables, socioeconomic things, geography, even transportation factors.
13 potential explanations. And which ones actually seem to matter most in predicting a country's water profile?
Well, what was really striking was that only 3 emerged as the most relevant predictors.
Only 3. Which ones?
The single most important predictor was household private car ownership.
Car ownership. Really? That's surprising.
Yeah, followed by population density and then per capita GDP.
Huh. Car ownership, population density, and GDP. An intriguing trio. How did the decision tree link these to the typologies?
Okay, so it suggested that countries with car ownership above 12% and population density below about 104 people per square kilometer were very likely to be in that centralized group.
Interesting. So maybe having more cars in less dense areas makes widespread piped infrastructure more, I don't know, feasible or demanded.
That could be part of the story. Conversely, countries with less than 12% car ownership and density below 250 people per square kilometer were more likely to be decentralized.
So lower car ownership, still relatively spread out, perhaps leading to more localized, non-piped solutions being dominant.
That seems plausible. And the hybrid group, it showed 2 potential paths in the decision tree.
Okay.
Path 1 was high population density, low car ownership, but with a per capita GDP over about $1,459.
Ah, so enough economic development to support maybe those vended markets, even without cars and in dense areas.
Potentially. The other path to hybrid was high car ownership over 12%, but with a median population density between roughly 104 and 250 people per square kilometer.
Fascinating. So a specific kind of balance between transport, density, and maybe wealth seems to foster that mixed piped and vended approach.
It certainly suggests complex interactions.
Yeah.
And they didn't just stop at prediction. They also looked at how those original 7 water access factors related to these 3 key predictors, cars, density, GDP.
Right, to see the correlations, what patterns emerged there. Did higher car ownership link to specific water sources?
It seemed to, yeah. Higher car ownership tended to correlate with lower scores on factors like far spring and nearby surface. So less reliance on those types of sources,
And more reliance on.
more reliance on piped indoors,
Hmm?
higher correlation there, which kind of makes intuitive sense, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe easier household connections if transport isn't a major barrier for, say, maintenance or initial build out. What about vended water in cars?
Interestingly, the vended factor didn't show a clear relationship with car ownership. Suggests the reasons for buying water are maybe more complex than just transport access.
Okay, and population density, how did that correlate?
Higher density tended to correlate with lower piped indoor scores.
So denser places had less in-home piping on average, maybe challenges in building out infrastructure in really packed areas, or more reliance on shared taps.
Could be, and that nearby surface access seemed mostly concentrated in the less dense countries within the decentralized group.
Right, more rural, spread out areas, maybe relying on rivers or lakes nearby. Makes sense. What about the money factor per capita GDP?
Well, generally, higher GDP correlated with less reliance on far well and far spring and more on piped indoors, as you might expect.
Wealthier countries, better infrastructure.
Broadly, yes. Though, interestingly, that piped indoors trend seemed to plateau and even slightly dip at the very highest GDP levels they studied. And nearby surface use had a strong negative link with GDP, less common in richer countries.
But were there exceptions? Countries that didn't quite fit the GDP trend?
Yes, definitely. They mentioned Armenia and Egypt, for instance, having higher piped indoors access than you might expect, just based on their GDP.
Maybe historical investments or specific policies?
Could be. And Angola was interesting too, higher GDP within the decentralized group, but still a notable reliance on nearby surface access. It just highlights that while economics matter a lot, it's not the only thing going on.
Those exceptions really drive home that point. There are likely other crucial factors: history, politics, environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's really crucial to stress, as the researchers did, that these are correlations, not proof of causation.
Right. Car ownership doesn't cause pipe water, but they tend to appear together in certain patterns. These are indicators, not necessarily direct levers for change.
Exactly. You can't just give everyone cars and expect the water system to magically transform.
So stepping back then, what's the big takeaway here? Why is this typology framework useful?
I think its real power is shifting the perspective. It moves us beyond just thinking Africa needs X or Asia needs Y.
Because the challenges aren't always defined by borders.
Precisely. It lets us group countries based on the actual functional patterns of water access. A decentralized country in Africa might have more in common, challenge-wise, with a decentralized country in Asia than its immediate neighbor with a centralized system.
Which could lead to much better knowledge sharing, right? More targeted solutions based on similar underlying structures.
That's the hope, sharing what works or what doesn't between places facing genuinely similar situations.
And that hybrid typology feels particularly significant, doesn't it? It suggests the pathway isn't always just a straight line towards everyone having indoor taps.
It really does. It highlights this growing complexity established infrastructure mixing with, and sometimes maybe competing with, these market-based vended solutions.
Which raises some big questions.
Huge questions. Like, what are the long-term sustainability implications of relying heavily on, say, bottled water?
And what about equity? In those hybrid countries, who gets the reliable piped water and who relies on potentially more expensive or less consistently available vended water? Is there a divide?
These are absolutely critical questions for policy and development. And, thinking even more broadly,
Yeah.
could this way of thinking, looking at the outplay of infrastructure, economics, transport, density, help us understand access to other essential things, even in our own more developed communities?
That's a really powerful thought. It's not just about water and LMICs. It's about the fundamental factors shaping access to resources everywhere.
Mhm.
So maybe the final thought to leave our listeners with. Could understanding these kinds of typologies help us perhaps anticipate future challenges? Or opportunities, especially as climate change and economic shifts continue to reshape things globally?
It's a key question. What might actually trigger a country to transition from, say, a decentralized profile towards a hybrid or centralized